The Hound of the Baskervilles by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 8. First Report of Dr. Watson. From this point onward, I will follow the course of events by transcribing my own letters to Mr. Sherlock Holmes which lie before me on the table. One page is missing, but otherwise they are exactly as written, and show my feelings and suspicions of the moment more accurately than my memory, clear as it is upon these tragic events, can possibly do. Baskerville Hall, October 13th. My dear Holmes, my previous letters and telegrams have kept you pretty well up to date as to all that has occurred in this most God-forsaken corner of the world. The longer one stays here, the spirit of the moors sink into one's soul, its vastness, and also its grim charm. When you are once out upon its bosom, you have left all traces of modern England behind you. But, on the other hand, you are conscious everywhere of the homes and the work of the prehistoric people. On all sides of you as you walk are the houses of these forgotten folk, with their graves and huge monoliths which they are supposed to have marked their temples. As you look at their grey stone huts against the scarred hillsides, you leave your own age behind you, and if you were to see a skin-clad, hairy man crawl out from the low door fitting a flint-tipped arrow onto the string of his bow, you would feel that his presence there were more natural than your own. The strange thing is that they should have lived so thickly on what must have always been the most unfruitful soil. I am no antiquarian, but I could imagine that they were like some unwarlike and harried race who were forced to accept that which no other would occupy. All this, however, is foreign to the mission on which you sent me, and will probably be very uninteresting to your severely practical mind. I can still remember your complete indifference as to whether the sun moved around the earth or the earth moved around the sun. Let me, therefore, return to the facts concerning Sir Henry Baskerville. If you have not had any report within the last few days, it is because up to today there was nothing of importance to relate. Then a very surprising circumstance occurred, which I shall tell you in due course. But, first of all, I must keep you in touch with some of the other factors of the situation. One of these, concerning which I have said little, is the escaped convict upon the moor. There is strong reason now to believe that he has got right away, which is a considerable relief to the lonely householders of this district. A fortnight has passed since his flight, during which he has not been seen and nothing has been heard of him. It is surely inconceivable that he could have held out upon the moor during all that time. Of course, so far as concealment goes there is no difficulty at all. Any one of these stone huts would give him a hiding place. There is nothing to eat unless he were to catch and slaughter one of the moor sheep. We think, therefore, that he is gone, and the outlying farmers sleep the better in consequence. We are 4 able-bodied men in this household, so that we could take care of ourselves, but I confess that I have had uneasy moments when I have thought of the Stapletons. They live miles from any help. There are 1 maid, an old manservant, the sister, and the brother, the latter not a very strong man. They would be helpless in the hands of a desperate fellow like this Notting Hill criminal if he could at once effect an entrance. Both Sir Henry and I were concerned over their situation, and it was suggested that Perkins, the groom, should go over to sleep there, but Stapleton would hear nothing of it. The fact is that our friend, the Baronet, begins to display a considerable interest in our fair neighbour. It is not to be wondered at, for time hangs heavily in his lonely spot to an active man like him, and she is a very fascinating and beautiful woman. There is something tropical and exotic about her which forms a singular contrast to her cool and unemotional brother. Yet he also gives the idea of hidden fires. He has certainly a very marked influence over her, for I have seen her continually glance at him as if she talked as if seeking approbation for what she said. I trust that he is kind to her. There is a dry glitter in his eyes and a firm set of his thin lips, which goes with a positive and possibly harsh nature. You would find him an interesting study. He came over to call upon Baskerville on that first day, and the very next morning he took us both to show the spot where the legend of the wicked Hugo is supposed to have had its origin. It was an excursion of some miles across the moor to a place which is so dismal that it might have suggested the story. We found a short valley between rugged tors which led to an open, grassy space flecked over with white cotton grass. In the middle of it rose 2 great stones, worn and sharpened at the upper end until they looked like huge, corroding fangs of some monstrous beast. In every way it corresponded with the scene of the old tragedy. Sir Henry was much interested, and asked Stapleton more than once whether he did really believe in the possibility of the interference of the supernatural in the affairs of men. He spoke lightly, but it was evident that he was very much in earnest. Stapleton was guarded in his replies, but it was easy to see that he said less than he might, and that he would not express his whole opinion out of consideration for the feelings of the baronet. He told us of familiar cases, where families had suffered for some evil influence, and he left us with the impression that he shared the popular view on the matter. On our way back we stayed for lunch at Merripit House, and it was there that Sir Henry made the acquaintance of Miss Stapleton. From the first moment that he saw her, he appeared to be strongly attracted to her, and I am much mistaken if the feeling was not mutual. He referred to her again and again on our walk home, and since then hardly a day has passed when we had not seen something of the brother and sister. They dine here tonight, and there is some talk of our going to them next week. One would imagine that such a match would be very welcome to Stapleton, and yet I have more than once caught a look of the strongest disapprobation in his face when Sir Henry has been paying some attention to his sister. He is much attached to her, no doubt, and would lead a lonely life without her, but it would seem the height of selfishness if he were to stand in the way of her making so brilliant a marriage. Yet I am certain that he does not wish their intimacy to ripen into love, and I have several times observed that he has taken pains to prevent them from being tête-à-tête. By the way, your instructions to me to never allow Sir Henry to go out alone will become very much more onerous if a love affair were to be added to our difficulties. My popularity would soon suffer if I were to carry out your orders to the letter. The other day, Thursday to be more exact, Dr. Mortimer lunched with us. He has been excavating a barrow at Long Down, and has got a prehistoric skull which fills him with great joy. Never was there such a single-minded enthusiast as he. The Stapletons came in afterwards, and the good doctor took us all to Yew Alley at Sir Henry's request to show us exactly how everything occurred upon the fatal night. It is a long, dismal walk, the Yew Alley, between two high walls of clipped hedge, with a narrow band of grass upon either side. At the far end is an old tumble-down summer-house. Halfway down is the moor gate, where the old gentleman left his cigar-ash. It is a white wooden gate with a latch. Beyond it lies the wide moor. I remembered your theory of the affair, and tried to picture all that had occurred. As the old man stood there, he saw something coming across the moor, something which terrified him so that he lost his wits and ran until he died of sheer horror and exhaustion. There was a long, gloomy tunnel down which he fled. And from what? A sheepdog of the moor, or a spectral hound, black, silent, and monstrous? Was there a human agency in the matter? Did the pale, watchful Barrymore know more than he cared to say? It was all dim and vague, but always there is the dark shadow of crime behind it. One other neighbor I have met since I wrote last. This is Mr. Franklin, of Laughter Hall, who lives some 4 miles to the south of us. He is an elderly man, red-faced, white hair, and choleric. His passion is for British law, and he has spent a large fortune in his litigation. He fights for the mere pleasure of fighting, and is equally ready to take up either side of the question, so that it is no wonder that he has found it a costly amusement. Sometimes he will shut up a right-of-way, and defy the parish to make him open it. At others, he will with his own hands tear down another man's gate, and declare that a path has existed there for some time immemorial, defying the owner to prosecute him for trespass. He has learned an old manorial and communal rights, and he applies his knowledge sometimes in favor of the villagers of Fernworthy, and sometimes against them, so that he is periodically carried in triumph down the village street, or else burned in effigy, according to his latest exploit. He is said to have about 7 lawsuits upon his hands at present, which will probably swallow up the remainder of his fortune, and so draw his sting and leave him harmless in the future. Apart from the law, he seems a kindly, good-natured person, and I only mention him because you are particular that I should send some description of the people who surround us. He is curiously employed at present, for, being an amateur astronomer, he has an excellent telescope, with which he lies upon the roof of his own house and sweeps the moor all day in hopes of catching a glimpse of the escaped convict. If he would confine his energies to this, all would be well, but there are rumors that he intends to prosecute Dr. Mortimer for opening a grave without the consent of the next of kin, because he dug up the Neolithic skull in the barrow on Longdown. He helps to keep our lives from being monotonous, and gives a little comic relief where it is needed badly. And now, having brought you up to date on the escaped convict, the Stapletons, Dr. Mortimer, and Franklin of Laughter Hall, let me end on that which is most important, and tell you more about the Barrymores, and especially about the surprising development of last night. First of all about the test telegram, which you sent from London in order to make sure the Barrymore was really there. I have already explained that the testimony of the postmaster shows that the test was worthless, and that we have no proof one way or the other. I told Sir Henry how the matter stood, and he at once, in his downright fashion, had Barrymore up and asked him whether he had received the telegram himself. Barrymore said that he had.
"Did the boy deliver it into your own hands?"
asked Sir Henry. Barrymore looked surprised, and considered for a little time.
"No," said he. "I was in the box room at the time, and my wife brought it up."
"Did you answer it yourself?"
"No. I told my wife to answer, and she went down to write it."
In the evening, he recurred to the subject of his own accord.
"I could not quite understand the object of your questions this morning, Sir Henry," said he. "I trust that you do not mean that I have done anything to forfeit your confidence."
Sir Henry had to assure him that it was not so, and pacify him by giving him a considerable part of his old wardrobe, the London outfit having now arrived. Mrs. Barrymore is of interest to me. She is a heavy, solid person, very limited, intensely respectable, and inclined to be puritanical. You could hardly conceive a less emotional subject. Yet I have told you how, on the first night here, I heard her sobbing bitterly, and since then I have more than once observed traces of tears upon her face. Some deep sorrow gnaws ever at her heart. Sometimes I wonder if she has a guilty memory which haunts her, and sometimes I suspect Barrymore of being a domestic tyrant. I have always felt that there was something singular and questionable in this man's character, but the adventure of last night brings all my suspicions to a head. And yet it may seem a small matter in itself. You are aware that I am not a very sound sleeper, and since I have been on guard in this house, my slumbers have been lighter than ever. Last night, about 2 in the morning, I was aroused by a stealthy step passing my room. I rose, opened the door, and peeped out. A long black shadow was trailing down the corridor. It was thrown by a man who walked softly down the passage with a candle held in his hand. He was in shirt and trousers, with no covering to his feet. I could merely see the outline, but his height told me that it was Barrymore. He walked very slowly and circumspectly, and there was something indescribably guilty and furtive in his whole appearance. I have told you that the corridor is broken by the balcony which runs round the hall, but that it is resumed upon the farther side. I waited until he passed out of sight, and then I followed him. When I came round the balcony, he had reached the end of the farther corridor, and I could see him from the glimmer of light through an open door that he had entered one of the rooms. Now all of these rooms are unfurnished and unoccupied, so that his expedition became more mysterious than ever. The light shone steadily as if he were standing motionless. I crept down the passage as noiselessly as I could, and peeped round the corner of the door. Barrymore was crouching at the window with the candle held against the glass. His profile was half turned towards me, and his face seemed to be rigid with expectation as he stared out into the blackness of the moor. For a few minutes he stood watching intently. Then he gave a deep groan, and with an impatient gesture he put out the light. Instantly I made my way back to my room, and very shortly came upon stealthy steps passing once more upon their return journey. Long afterwards, when I had fallen into a light sleep, I heard the key turn somewhere in a lock, but I could not tell whence the sound came. What it all means I cannot guess, but there is some secret business going on in this house of gloom which sooner or later we shall get to the bottom of. I do not trouble you with my theories, for you asked me to furnish you only with facts. I have had a long talk with Sir Henry this morning, and we have made a plan to campaign founded upon my observations of last night. I will not speak about it just now, but it should make my next report interesting reading. Chapter 9. The Light upon the Moor. Second Report of Dr. Watson. Baskerville Hall, October 15th. My dear Holmes, if I was compelled to leave you without much news during the early days of my mission, you must acknowledge that I am making up for lost time, and that events are now crowding thick and fast upon us. In my last report, I ended upon my top note with Barrymore at the window, and now I have quite a budget already which will, unless I am much mistaken, considerably surprise you. Things have taken a turn which I could not have anticipated. In some ways, they have, within the last 48 hours, become much clearer, and in some ways, they have become much more complicated. But I will tell you all, and you shall judge for yourself. Before breakfast, on the morning following my adventure, I went down the corridor and examined the room in which Barrymore had been the night before. The western window through which he had stared so intently has, I noticed, one peculiarity above all other windows in the house. It commands the nearest outlook onto the moor. There is an opening between 2 trees which enables one from this point of view to look right down upon it, while from all other windows it is only a distant glimpse which can be obtained. It follows, therefore, that Barrymore, since only this window would serve the purpose, must have been looking out for something or somebody upon the moor. The night was very dark, so that I can hardly imagine how he could have hoped to see anyone. And it struck me that it was possible that some love intrigue was on foot. That would have accounted for his stealthy movements, and also for the uneasiness of his wife. The man is a striking-looking fellow, very well equipped to steal the heart of a country girl, so that this theory might have something to support it. That opening of the door which I had heard after I returned to my room might mean that he had gone out to keep some clandestine appointment. So I reasoned with myself in the morning, and I tell you the direction of my suspicions, however much the result may have shown that they were unfounded. But whatever the true explanation of Barrymore's movements might be, I felt that the responsibility of keeping them to myself until I could explain them was much more than I could bear. I had an interview with the Baronet in his study after breakfast, and I told him all that I had seen. He was less surprised than I had expected.
"I knew that Barrymore walked about nights, and I had a mind to speak with him about it," said he. "2 or 3 times I have heard his steps in passage, coming and going, just about the hour you name."
"Perhaps, then, he pays a visit every night to that particular window?" I suggested.
"Perhaps he does. If so, we should be able to shadow him and see what he is after. I wonder what your friend Holmes would do if he were here."
"I believe that he would do exactly what you now suggest," said I. "He would follow Barrymore and see what he did."
"Then we shall do it together."
"But surely he would hear us."
"The man is rather deaf, and in any case we must take our chance of that. We'll sit in the room tonight and wait until he passes."
Sir Henry rubbed his hands with pleasure, and it was evident that he had hailed the adventure as a relief to his somewhat quiet life upon the moor. "The baronet has been in communication with the architect who prepared the plans for Sir Charles, and with a contractor from London, so that we may expect great changes to begin here soon. There have been decorators and furnishers up from Plymouth, and it is evident that our friend has large ideas and means to spare no pains or expense to restore the grandeur of his family. When the house is renovated and refurnished, all that he will need will be a wife to make it complete. Between ourselves, there are pretty clear signs that this will not be wanting if the lady is willing, for I have seldom seen a man more infatuated with a woman than he is with our beautiful neighbour, Miss Stapleton. And yet, the course of true love does not run quite as smoothly as one would under the circumstances expect. Today, for example, its surface was broken by a very unexpected ripple, which has caused our friend considerable perplexity and annoyance. After the conversation which I have quoted about Barrymore, Sir Henry put on his hat and prepared to go out. As a matter of course, I did the same.
"What, are you coming, Watson?"
he asked, looking at me in a curious way. "That depends on whether you are going on the moor," said I.
"Yes, I am."
"Well, you know what my instructions are. I am sorry to intrude, but you heard how earnestly Holmes insisted that I should not leave you, and especially that you should not go alone upon the moor." Sir Henry put his hand upon my shoulder with a pleasant smile.
"My dear fellow," said he, "Holmes, with all his wisdom, did not foresee some things which have happened since I have been on the moor. You understand me? I'm sure that you are the last man in the world who would wish to be a spoilsport. I must go alone."
It put me in a most awkward position. I was at a loss what to say or what to do, and before I made up my mind he picked up his cane and was gone. But when I came to think upon the matter, my conscience reproached me bitterly for having on any pretext allowed him to go out of my sight. I imagined what my feelings would be if I had to return to you and confess that some misfortune had occurred through my disregard for your instructions. I assured you my cheeks flushed at the very thought. It might not even now be too late to overtake him, so I set off at once in the direction of Merripit House. I hurried along the road at the top of my speed without seeing anything of Sir Henry until I came to the point where the moor path branches off. There, fearing perhaps that I had come in the wrong direction after all, I mounted a hill from which I could command a view. The same hill is cut into the dark quarry. Thence I saw him at once. He was on the moor path about 1/4 of a mile off, and a lady was by his side who could only be Miss Stapleton. It was clear that he was already an understanding between them, and that they had met by appointment. They were walking slowly along in deep conversation, and I saw her making quick little movements of her hands as if she were very earnest in what she was saying, while he listened intently, and once or twice shook his head in strong dissent. I stood among the rocks watching them, very much puzzled as to what I should do next. To follow them and break into their intimate conversation seemed to be an outrage, and yet my clear duty was never for an instant to let him out of sight. To act the spy upon the friend was a hateful task. Still, I could hear no better course than to observe him from the hill, and to clear my conscience by confessing to him afterwards what I had done. It is true that if any sudden danger had threatened him, I was too far away to be of use, and yet I am sure that you will agree with me that the position was very difficult, and that there was nothing more which I could do. Our friend, Sir Henry, and the lady had halted on the path and were standing deeply absorbed in their conversation, when I was suddenly aware that I was not the only witness of their interview. A wisp of green floating in the air caught my eye, and another glance showed me that it was carried by a stick by a man who was moving along the broken ground. It was Stapleton with his butterfly net. He was very much closer to the pair than I was, and he appeared to be moving in their direction. At this instant Sir Henry suddenly drew Miss Stapleton to his side. His arm was round her, but it seemed to me that she was straining away from him with her face averted. He stooped his head to hers, and she raised one hand as if in protest. Next moment I saw them spring apart and turn hurriedly around. Stapleton was the cause of the interruption. He was running wildly towards them, his absurd net dangling behind him. He gesticulated and almost danced with excitement in front of the lovers. What the scene meant I could not imagine, but it seemed to me that Stapleton was abusing Sir Henry, who offered explanations, which became more angry as the other refused to accept them. The lady stood by in haughty silence. Finally Stapleton turned upon his heel and beckoned in a peremptory way to his sister, who, after an irresolute glance at Sir Henry, walked off by the side of her brother. The naturalist's angry gestures showed that the lady was included in his displeasure. The baronet stood for a minute looking after them, and then he walked slowly back the way he had come, his head hanging, the very picture of dejection. What all this meant I could not imagine, but I was deeply ashamed to have witnessed so intimate a scene without my friend's knowledge. I ran down the hill, therefore, and met the baronet at the bottom. His face was flushed with anger, and his brows were wrinkled, like one who is at his wit's end what to do.
"Hullo, Watson! Where have you dropped from?"
he said.
"You didn't mean to say that you came after me in spite of it all."
I explained everything to him, how I had found it impossible to remain behind, how I had followed him, how I had witnessed all that had occurred. For an instant his eyes blazed at me, but my frankness disarmed his anger, and he broke at last into a rather rueful laugh.
"You would have thought in the middle of that prairie a fairly safe place for a man to be private," said he. "But by thunder, the whole countryside seems to have been out to see me do my wooing, and mighty poor wooing at that. Where had you engaged a seat?"
"I was on that hill."
"Quite in the back row, eh? Well, her brother was well up to the front. Did you see him come out on us?"
"Yes, I did."
"Did he ever strike you as being crazy, this brother of hers?"
"I can't say that he ever did."
"I dare say not. I always thought him sane until today. But you can take it from me that either he or I ought to be in a straitjacket. What's the matter with me, anyhow? You've lived near me for some weeks, Watson. Tell me straight now. Is there anything that would prevent me from making a good husband to a woman that I loved?"
"I would say not."
"He can't object to my worldly position, so it must be myself that he has this down on. What has he against me? I never hurt man or woman in my life that I know of, and yet he would not so much as let me touch the tips of her fingers."
"Did he say so?"
"That and a deal more. I tell you, Watson, I've only known her for these few weeks, but from the first I just felt that she was made for me, and she, too, she was happy when she was with me, and that I'll swear. There's a light in the woman's eyes that speaks louder than words. But he has never let us get together, and it was only today for the first time that I saw a chance of having a few words with her alone. She was glad to meet me, but when she did, it was not love that she would talk about, and she wouldn't let me talk about it either, if she could have stopped it. She kept coming back to it that this was a place of danger, and that she would never be happy until I had left it. I told her that since I had seen her, I was in no hurry to leave it, and that if she really wanted me to go, the only way to work it was for her to arrange to go with me. With that I offered in as many words to marry her. But before she could answer, down came this brother of hers, running at us with a face on him like a madman. He was just white with rage, and those light eyes of his were blazing with fury. What was I going to do with the lady? How dared I offer her attentions which were distasteful to her? Did I think that because I was a baronet I could do what I liked? If he had not been her brother, I should have known better how to answer him. As it was, I told him that my feelings towards his sister were such that I was not ashamed of, and that I hoped she might honor me by becoming my wife. That seemed to make the matter no better, and then I lost my temper too, and I answered him rather more hotly than I should have, perhaps, considering that she was standing by. So it ended by his going off with her, as you saw, and here I am, as badly puzzled a man as any in this country. Just tell me what it all means, Watson, and I'll owe you more than I ever can hope to pay."
I tried one or two explanations, but indeed I was completely puzzled myself. Our friend's title, his fortune, his age, his character, and his appearance are all in his favor, and I know nothing against him unless it be this dark fate which runs in his family, that his advances should be rejected so brusquely, without any interference to the lady's own wishes, and that the lady should accept the situation without protest, is very amazing. However, our conjectures were set with the rest by the visit from Stapleton himself that very afternoon. He had come to offer apologies for his rudeness of the morning, and after a long private interview with Sir Henry in his study, the upshot of their conversation was that the breach is quite healed, and that we are to dine at Merripit House next Friday as a sign of it.
"I don't say now that he isn't a crazy man," said Sir Henry. "I can't forget the look in his eyes when he ran at me this morning, but I must allow that no man could make a more handsome apology than he has done."
Did he give any explanation of his conduct?
"His sister is everything in his life, he says. That is natural enough, and I am glad that he should understand her value. They have always been together, and according to his account, he has been a very lonely man with only her as a companion, so that the thought of losing her was very terrible to him. He had not understood, he said, that I was becoming attached to her, but when he saw with his own eyes that it really was so, and that she might be taken away from him, it gave him such a shock that for a time he was not responsible for what he said or did. He was very sorry for all that had passed, and he recognized how foolish and how selfish it was that he should imagine that he could hold a beautiful woman like his sister to himself for her whole life. If she had to leave him, he had rather it was to a neighbor like myself than to anyone else. But in any case, it was a blow to him, and it would take some time before he could prepare himself to meet it. He would withdraw all opposition upon his part if I would promise for 3 months to let the matter rest, and to be content with cultivating the lady's friendship during that time without claiming her love. This I promised, and so the matter rests."
So there's one of our small mysteries cleared up. It is something to have touched bottom anywhere in this bog in which we are floundering. We know now why Stapleton looked with disfavour upon his sister's suitor, even when that suitor was so eligible a one as Sir Henry. And now I pass on to another thread which I have extricated out of the tangled skein, the mystery of the sobs in the night, of the tear-stained face of Miss Barrymore, of the secret journey of the butler to the western lattice window. Congratulate me, Sir Holmes, and tell me that I have not disappointed you as an agent, that you do not regret the confidence which you have shown me when you sent me down. All these things have by one night's work been thoroughly cleared. I have said by one night's work, but in truth it was by 2 nights' work. For the first we drew entirely blank. I sat with Sir Henry in his rooms until nearly 3 o'clock in the morning, but no sound of any sort did we hear except the chiming clock upon the stairs. It was a most melancholy vigil, and ended by each of us falling asleep in our chairs. Fortunately, we were not discouraged, and we were determined to try again. The next night we lowered the lamp and sat smoking cigarettes without making the least sound. It was incredible how slowly the hours crawled by, and yet we were helped through it by the same sort of patient interest which a hunter must feel as he watches the trap into which he hopes the game may wander. 1 struck, and 2, and we had almost for the second time given up in despair, when in an instant we both sat bolt upright in our chairs, with all our weary senses keenly on the alert once more. We had heard the creak of a step in the passage. Very stealthily we heard it pass along until it died away in the distance. Then the baronet opened the door, and we set out in pursuit. Already our man had gone round the gallery, and the corridor was all in darkness. Softly, we stole along until we had come into the other wing. We were just in time to catch a glimpse of the tall, black-bearded figure, his shoulders rounded as he tiptoed down the passage. Then he passed through the same door as before, and the light of the candle framed it in the darkness, and we shot one single yellow beam across the gloom of the corridor. We shuffled cautiously towards it, trying every plank before we dared to put our whole weight upon it. We had taken the precaution of leaving our boots behind us, but, even so, the old boards snapped and creaked under our tread. Sometimes it seemed impossible that he should fail to hear our approach. However, the man is fortunately rather deaf, and he was entirely preoccupied in that which he was doing. When at last we reached the door, and peeped through, we found him crouching at the window, candle in hand, his white, intent face pressed against the pane, exactly as I had seen him 2 nights before. We had arranged no plan of campaign, but the Baronet is a man to whom the most direct way is always the most natural. He walked into the room, and as he did so, Barrymore sprang up from the window with a sharp hiss of his breath and stood, livid and trembling, before us. His dark eyes, glaring out of the window mask his face, were full of horror and astonishment as he gazed from Sir Henry to me.
"What are you doing here, Barrymore?"
"Nothing, sir."
His agitation was so great that he could barely speak, and the shadows sprang up and down from the shaking of his candle.
"It was the window, sir. I go around at night to make sure they are fastened."
"On the 2nd floor?"
"Yes, sir. All the windows."
"Look here, Barrymore," said Sir Henry sternly. "We have made up our minds to have the truth out of you, so it will only save you the trouble to tell it sooner rather than later. Come now, no lies. What were you doing at that window?"
The fellow looked at us in a helpless way, and he wrung his hands together like one who is in the last extremity of doubt and misery.
"I was doing no harm, sir. I was holding a candle to the window."
"And why were you holding a candle to the window?"
"Don't ask me, Sir Henry. Don't ask me. I give you my word, sir, that it is not my secret, and that I cannot tell it. If it concerned no one but myself, I would not try to keep it from you."
A sudden idea occurred to me, and I took the candle from the trembling hand of the butler. "He must have been holding it as a signal," said I. "Let us see if there is any answer." I held it as he had done, and stared out into the darkness of the night. Vaguely I could discern the black bank of the trees and the lighter expanse of the moor, for the moon was behind the clouds. And then I gave a cry of exultation, for a tiny pinpoint of yellow light had suddenly transfixed in the dark veil, and glowed steadily in the center of the black square framed by the window. "There it is!" I cried.
"No, sir. No, it is nothing at all,"
the butler broke in.
"I assure you, sir."
"Move your light across the window, Watson,"
cried the Baronet.
"See, the other moves also. Now, you rascal, do you deny that it is a signal? Come, speak up. Who is your confederate out yonder? And what is this conspiracy that is going on?"
The man's face became openly defiant.
"It is my business, not yours. I will not tell."
"Then you may leave my employment right away."
"Very good, sir, if I must."
"And you go in disgrace. By thunder, you may well be ashamed of yourself. Your family has lived with mine for over 100 years under this roof, and here I find you deep in some dark plot against me."
"No, sir, no, not against you." It was a woman's voice, and Mrs. Barrymore, paler and more horror-struck than her husband, was standing at the door. Her bulky figure in a shawl and skirt might have been comic were it not for the intensity of feeling upon her face.
"We have to go, Eliza. This is the end of it. You can pack our things,"
said the butler.
"Oh, John, have I brought you to this? It is my doing, Sir Henry, all mine. He has done nothing except for my sake and because I asked him." "Speak out, then. What does it mean?" "My unhappy brother is starving on the moor. We cannot let him perish at our very gates. The light is a signal to him that food is ready for him, and his light out yonder is to show the spot to which to bring it." "Then your brother is—" "The escaped convict, sir. Selden, the criminal."
"That's the truth, sir," said Barrymore. "I said that it was not my secret, and that I could not tell it to you. But now you have heard it, and you will see that if there is a plot, it was not against you.
This, then, was the explanation of the stealthy expeditions at night and the light at the window. Sir Henry and I both stared at the woman in amazement. Was it possible that this solidly respectable person was of the same blood as one of the most notorious criminals in the country?
Yes, sir, my name was Selden, and he was my younger brother. We humored him too much when he was a lad, and gave him his own way in everything until he came to think that the world was made for his pleasure, and that he could do with it what he liked. When he grew older, he met wicked companions, and the devil entered him until he broke my mother's heart and dragged our name in the dirt. From crime to crime he sank lower and lower until it was only the mercy of God which has snatched him from the scaffold. But to me, sir, he was always a little curly-haired boy that I had nursed and played with as an elder sister would. That is why he broke prison, sir. He knew that I was here, and we would not refuse him. When he dragged himself here one night, weary and starving, with the warders hard at his heels, what could we do? We took him in and fed him and cared for him. Then you returned, sir, and my brother thought that he would be safer on the moor than anywhere else until the hue and cry was over. So he laid in hiding there. But every second night we made sure if he was still there by putting a light in the window. And if there was an answer, my husband took out some bread and meat to him. Every day we hoped that he was gone, but as long as he was there, we could not desert him. That is the whole truth, and I am an honest Christian woman, and you will see that if there is blame in the matter, it does not lie with my husband, but with me, for whose sake he has done all that he has.
The woman's words came with intense earnestness, which carried conviction with them.
Is this true, Barrymore?
Yes, Sir Henry, every word of it.
Well, I cannot blame you for standing by your wife. Forget what I have said. Go to your room, you two, and we shall talk further about this matter in the morning.
When they were gone, we looked out of the window again. Sir Henry had flung it open, and the cold night wind beat upon our faces. Far away in the black distance there still glowed that one tiny point of yellow light.
I wonder he dares,
said Henry. It may be so placed as to only be visible from here.
Very likely. How far do you think it is?
Out by the cleft tor, I think.
Not more than a mile or two off.
Hardly that.
Well, it cannot be fair if Barrymore had to carry the food out to it, and he is waiting, this villain, beside that candle. By thunder, Watson, I'm going to take that man.
The same thought had crossed my own mind. It was not as if the Barrymores had taken us into their confidence. Their secret had been forced from them. The man was a danger to the community, an unmitigated scoundrel for whom there was neither pity nor excuse. We were only doing our duty in taking this chance of putting him back where he could do no harm. With his brutal and violent nature, others would have to pay a price if we held our hands. Any night, for example, our neighbors the Stapletons might be attacked by him, and it may have been the thought of this which made Sir Henry so keen upon the adventure. I will come, said I.
Then get your revolver and put on your boots. The sooner we start the better, as the fellow may put out his light and be off.
In 5 minutes we were outside the door, starting upon our expedition. We hurried through the dark shrubbery, amid the dull moaning of the autumn wind and the rustle of the falling leaves. The night air was heavy with the smell of damp and decay. Now and again the moon peeped out for an instant, but clouds were driving over the face of the sky, and just as we came out on the moor, a thin rain began to fall. The light still burned steadily in front. "Are you armed?" I asked.
"I have a hunting crop."
"We must close in on him rapidly, for he is said to be a desperate fellow. We shall take him by surprise and have him at our mercy before he can resist."
"I say, Watson," said the Baronet, "what would Holmes say to this? How about that hour of darkness in which the power of evil is exalted?"
As if in answer to his words, there rose suddenly out of the vast gloom of the moor a strange cry which I had already heard upon the borders of the great Grimpen Mire. It came with the wind through the silence of the night, a long deep mutter, then a rising howl, then the sad moan in which it died away again. Again and again it sounded, the whole air throbbing with it, strident, wild, and menacing. The Baronet caught my sleeve, and his face glittered white throughout the darkness.
"My God! What's that, Watson?"
"I don't know. It's a sound they have on the moor. I heard it once before. It died away, and an absolute silence closed in upon us. We stood straining our ears, but nothing came.
"Watson,"
said the Baronet,
"it was the cry of a hound."
My blood ran cold in my veins, for there was a break in his voice which told of the sudden horror which had seized him.
"What do they call this sound?"
he asked. Who?
"The folk on the countryside."
Oh, they are ignorant people. Why should you mind what they call it?
"Tell me, Watson, what do they say of it?"
I hesitated, but could not escape the question. They say it is the cry of the Hound of the Baskervilles. He groaned and went silent for a few minutes.
"A hound it was," he said at last, "but it seemed to come from miles away, over yonder, I think."
It was hard to say from whence it came.
"It rose and fell with the wind. Isn't that the direction of the great Grimpen Mire?"
Yes, it is.
"Well, it was up there. Come now, Watson, don't you think yourself that it was the cry of a hound? I'm not a child. You need not fear to speak the truth."
Stapleton was with me when I heard it last. He said that it might be the calling of a strange bird.
"No, no, it was a hound. My God, can there be some truth in all these stories? Is it possible that I am really in a danger from so dark a cause? You don't believe it, do you, Watson?"
No.
"And yet it was one thing to laugh about it in London, and it is another to stand out here in the darkness of the moor and to hear such a cry as that. And my uncle! There was the footprint of the hound beside him as he lay. It all fits together. I don't think that I am a coward, Watson, but that sound seemed to freeze my very blood. Feel my hand."
It was as cold as a block of marble. You'll be all right tomorrow.
"I don't think I'll get that cry out of my head. What do you advise that we do now?"
Shall we turn back?
"No, by thunder! We have come out to get our man, and we will do it. We after the convict, and a hellhound, as likely as not after us. Come on, we'll see it through, if all the fiends of the pit were loose upon the moor."
We stumbled slowly along the darkness, with the black loom of the craggy hills around us, and the yellow speck of light burning steadily in front. There is nothing so deceptive as the distance of a light upon a pitch-black night, and sometimes the glimmer seemed to be far away upon the horizon, and sometimes it might have been within a few yards of us. But at last we could see whence it came, and then we knew that we indeed were very close. A guttering candle was stuck in a crevice in the rocks which flanked it on each side so as to keep the wind from it, and to also prevent it from being visible, save in our direction of Baskerville Hall. A boulder of granite concealed our approach, and crouching behind it we gazed over it at the signal light. It was strange to see this single candle burning there in the middle of the moor, with no sign of life near it, just the one straight yellow flame and the gleam of the rock on each side of it.
"What shall we do now?"
whispered Sir Henry. "Wait here. He must be near this light. Let us see if we can get a glimpse of him." The words were hardly out of my mouth when we both saw him. Over the rocks, in the crevice of which the candle burned, there was thrust out of an evil yellow face, a terrible animal face, all seamed and scored with vile passions, foul in the mire, with a bristling beard and hung with matted hair. It might well have belonged to one of those savages who dwelt in the burrows on the hillsides. The light beneath him was reflected in the small, cunning eyes which peered fiercely to right and left through the darkness like a crafty and savage animal who has heard the steps of the hunters. Something had evidently aroused his suspicions. It may have been that Barrymore had some private signal which he had neglected to give, or the fellow may have had some other reason for thinking that all was not well, but I could read his fears upon his wicked face. Any instant he might dash out the light and vanish in the darkness. I sprang forward, therefore, and Sir Henry did the same. At the same moment the convict screamed out a curse at us, and hurled a rock which splintered against the boulder which had sheltered us. I caught one glimpse of his short, squat, strongly built figure as he sprang to his feet and started to run. At the same moment, by a lucky chance, the moon broke through the clouds. We rushed over the brow of the hill, and there was our man running with great speed down the other side, springing over the stones in his way with the activity of a mountain goat. A long, lucky shot of my revolver might have crippled him, but I had only brought it to defend myself if attacked, and not to shoot an unarmed man who was running away. We were both swift runners, and in fairly good training, but we soon found that we had no chance of overtaking him. We saw him for a long time on the moonlight, until he was only a small speck moving swiftly among the boulders upon the side of the distant hill. We ran and ran until we were completely blown, but the space between us grew even wider. Finally, we stopped and sat panting on 2 rocks while we watched him disappearing into the distance. And it was at this moment that it occurred a most strange and unexpected thing. We had risen from our rocks and were turning to go home, having abandoned the hopeless chase. The moon was low upon the night, and the jagged pinnacle of granite stood up against the lower curve of its silver disk. There, outlined as an ebony statue out of that shining background, I saw the figure of a man upon the tor. Do not think that it was a delusion, Holmes. I assure you that I have never in my life seen anything more clearly. As far as I could judge, the figure was that of a tall, thin man. He stood with his legs a little separated, his arms folded, and his head bowed, as if he were brooding over that enormous wilderness of peat and granite which lay before him. He might have been the very spirit of that terrible place. It was not the convict. This man was far from the place where the latter had disappeared. Besides, he was a much taller man. With a cry of surprise I pointed him out to the baronet, but in the instant which I had turned to grasp the arm, the man was gone. There was the sharp pinnacle of granite still cutting the lower edge of the moon, but its peak bore no trace of that silent and motionless figure. I wished to go in that direction and to search the tor, but it was some distance away. The baronet's nerves were still quivering from that cry, which recalled the dark history of his family, and he was not in the mood for fresh adventures. He had not seen this lonely man upon the tor, and could not feel the thrill which his strange presence and his commanding attitude had given me. "A warder, no doubt," said he. "The moor has been thick with them since this fellow escaped. Well, perhaps his explanation may be a right one, but I should like to have some further proof of it. Today we mean to communicate to the Princetown people where they should look for their missing man, but it is hard lines that we have not actually had the triumph of bringing him back as our prisoner. Such are the adventures of last night, and you must acknowledge, my dear Holmes, that I have done you very well in the matter of a report. Much of what I tell you is no doubt quite irrelevant, but still I feel that it is best that I should let you know all the facts, and leave you to select for yourself those of which will be most service to you in helping you to your conclusions. We are certainly making some progress. So far as the Barrymores go, we have found the motives of their actions, and that has cleared up the situation very much. But the moor with its mysteries and its strange inhabitants remains as inscrutable as ever. Perhaps in my next I may be able to throw some light upon this also. Best of all it would be if you could come down to us. In any case, you will hear from me again in the course of the next few days.
Chapter 10. Extract from the Diary of Dr. Watson. So far, I have been able to quote from the reports which I have forwarded during these early days to Sherlock Holmes. Now, however, I have arrived at a point in my narrative where I am compelled to abandon this method and to trust once more to my own recollections, aided by the diary which I kept at the time. A few extracts from the latter will carry me on to those scenes which are indelibly fixed in every detail upon my memory. I proceed, then, from the morning which followed our abortive chase of the convict and our other strange experiences upon the moor. October 16th. A dull and foggy day with a drizzle of rain. The house is banked in with rolling clouds, which rise now and then to show the dreary curves of the moor, with thin silver veins upon the sides of the hills, and the distant boulders gleaming where the light strikes upon their wet faces. It is melancholy outside and in. The baronet is in a black reaction after the excitements of the night. I am conscious myself of a weight at my heart, and a feeling of impending danger, ever-present danger, which is the more terrible because I am unable to define it. And have I not cause for such a feeling? Consider the long sequence of events which have all pointed to some sinister influence which is at work around us. There is the death of the last occupant of the hall, fulfilling so exactly the conditions of the family legend, and there are repeated reports from peasants of the appearance of a strange creature upon the moor. Twice I have with my own ears heard the sound which resembled the distant baying of a hound. It is incredible, impossible, that it should really be outside the ordinary laws of nature. A spectral hound which leaves material footmarks and fills the air with its howling is surely not to be thought of. Stapleton may fall in with such superstition, and Mortimer also, but if I have one quality upon earth it is common sense, and nothing will persuade me to believe in such a thing.
To do so would be to descend to the level of these poor peasants, who are not content with a mere fiend dog, but must needs describe him with hellfire shooting from his mouth and eyes. Holmes and I could not listen to such fancies, and I am his agent. But facts are facts, and I've twice heard this crying upon the moor. Suppose that there really were some huge hound loose upon it, that would go far to explain everything. But where could such a hound lie concealed? Where did it get its food? Where did it come from? How is it that no one saw it by day? It must be confessed that the natural explanation offers almost as many difficulties as any other. And always, apart from the hound, there is the fact of the human agency in London, the man in the cab, and the letter which warned Sir Henry against the moor. This at least was real, but it might have been the work of a protecting friend as easily as of an enemy. Where is that friend or enemy now? Has he remained in London? Or has he followed us down here? Could he be the stranger whom I saw upon the tor? It is true that I have had only the one glance at him, and yet there are some things to which I am ready to swear. He knows no one whom I have seen down here, and I have now met all the neighbors. The figure was far taller than Stapleton, far thinner than that of Frankland. Barrymore it might have possibly been, but we had left him behind us, and I am certain that he could not have followed us. A stranger then is still dogging us, just as a stranger dogged us in London. We have never shaken him off. If I could lay my hands upon the man, then at least we might find ourselves at the end of all our difficulties. To this one purpose I must now devote my energies. My first impulse was to tell Sir Henry my plans. My second and wisest one is to play my own game and speak as little as possible to anyone. He is silent and distrait. His nerves have been strangely shaken by that sound upon the moor. I will say nothing to add to his anxieties, but I will take my own steps to attain my own end. We had a small scene this morning at breakfast. Barrymore asked to leave with Sir Henry, and they were closeted in his study with some little time. Sitting in the billiard-room, I more than once heard the sound of voices raised, and I had a pretty good idea what the point was which was under discussion. After a time the baronet opened his door and called for me.
"Barrymore considers that he has a grievance," he said. "He thinks that it was unfair on our part to hunt his brother-in-law down when he, of his own free will, had told us the secret."
The butler was standing very pale, but very collected before us.
"I may have spoken too warmly, sir," said he, "and if I have, I am sure that you beg your pardon. At the same time, I was very much surprised when I heard you two gentlemen come back this morning and learned that you had been chasing Selden. The poor fellow has enough to fight against, without my putting more upon his track."
"If you had only told us of your own free will, it would have been a different thing," said the baronet. "You only told us, or rather your wife told us, when it was forced from you and you could not help yourself."
"I didn't think you would have taken advantage of it, Sir Henry. Indeed I didn't."
"This man is a public danger. There have been lonely houses scattered over the moor, and he's a fellow who would stick at nothing. You only want to get a glimpse of his face to see that. Look at Mr. Stapleton's house, for example, with no one but himself to defend it. There's no safety for anyone until he is under lock and key."
"He'll break into no house, sir. I told you my solemn word upon that. But he will never trouble anyone in the country again. I assure you, Sir Henry, that in a very few days the necessary arrangements will have been made, and he will be on his way to South America. For God's sake, sir, I beg you not to let the police know that he is still upon the moor. They have given up the chase here, and he can lie quiet until the ship is ready for him. You can't tell him without getting my wife and me into trouble. I beg you, sir, to say nothing to the police."
"What say you, Watson?"
I shrugged my shoulders. If he were safely out of the country, it would relieve the taxpayer of a burden.
"But how about the chance of his holding someone up before he goes?"
"He would not do anything so mad, sir. We have provided him with all that he could want. To commit a crime would be to show where he was hiding."
"That is true," said Sir Henry. "Well, Barrymore—"
"God bless you, sir, and thank you from my heart. It would have killed my poor wife had he been taken again."
"I guess we are aiding and abetting a felony, Watson. But after what we have heard, it don't feel as if I could give the man up. So there is an end of it. All right, Barrymore, you can go."
With a few broken words of gratitude, the man turned, and he hesitated, and then came back.
"You have been so kind to us, sir, that I should like to do my best I can for you in return. I know something, Sir Henry, and perhaps I should have said it before, but it was long after the inquest that I found out. I've never breathed a word about it yet to mortal man. It's about Sir Charles's death."
The Baronet were both upon our feet. "Do you know how he died?"
"No, sir, I don't know that."
"What then?"
"I know why he was at the gate at that hour. It was to meet a woman."
"To meet a woman? He?"
"Yes, sir."
"And the woman's name?"
"I can't give you the name, sir, but I can give you the initials. Her initials were L.L."
"How do you know this, Barrymore?"
"Well, Sir Henry, your uncle had a letter that morning. He had usually a great many letters, but he was a public man and well known for his great heart, so that everyone who was in trouble was glad to turn to him. But that morning, as it chanced, there was only this one letter, so I took the more notice of it. It was from Coombe Tracy, and it was addressed in a woman's hand."
"Well?"
"Well, sir, I thought no more of the matter, and never would have done had it not been for my wife. Only a few weeks ago she was out cleaning Sir Charles's study. It had never been touched since his death, and she found the ashes of a burned letter in the back of the crate. The greater part of it had been charred to ashes, but one little slip, the end of a page, hung together, and the writing could still be read, though it was grey on a black ground. It seemed to us to be a postscript at the end of a letter that said, 'Please, as you are a gentleman, burn this letter, and be at the gate by 10 o'clock. Beneath it were the initials L.L.
"Have you got that slip?"
"No, sir. It crumbled all to bits after we moved it."
"Had Sir Charles received any other letters in the same writing?"
"Well, sir, I took no particular notice of his letters. I should not have noticed this one, only it happened to come along."
"And you have no idea who L.L. is?"
"No, sir, no more than you have. But I expect if we could lay our hands upon that lady, we should know more about Sir Charles's death."
"I cannot understand, Barrymore, how you came to conceal this important information."
"Well, sir, it was immediately after that our own trouble came upon us. And then again, sir, we were both of us very fond of Sir Charles, as we might be considering all that he had done for us. To break this up couldn't help our poor master, and it's well to go carefully when there's a lady in the case, even the best of us."
"You thought it might injure his reputation?"
"Well, sir, I thought no good could come of it. But now you have been kind to us, and I feel as though it would be treating you unfairly not to tell you all that I know about the matter."
"Very good, Barrymore. You can go."
When the butler had left us, Sir Henry turned to me.
"Well, Watson, what do you think of our new light?"
"It seems to leave the darkness rather blacker than before."
"So I think. But if we can only trace this L.L., it should clear up the whole business. We have gained that much. We know that there is someone who has the facts if we can only find her. What do you think we should do?"
"Let Holmes know all about it at once. It will give him the clue for which he has been seeking. I am much mistaken if it does not bring him down." I went at once to my room and drew up my report of the morning's conversation for Holmes. It was evident to me that he had been very busy of late, for the notes which I had from Baker Street were few and short, with no comments upon the information which I had supplied, and hardly any reference to my mission. No doubt his blackmailing case is absorbing all his faculties. And yet, this new factor must surely arrest his attention and renew his interest. I wish that he were here. October 17th. All day today the rain poured down, rustling on the ivy and dripping from the eaves. I thought of the convict out upon the bleak, cold, shelterless moor. Poor devil! Whatever his crimes, he has suffered something to atone for them. And then I thought of that other one, the face in the cab, the figure against the moon. Was he also out in that deluge, the unseen watcher, the man of darkness? In the evening I put on my waterproof, and I walked far upon the sodden moor, full of dark imaginings, the rain beating upon my face and the wind whistling about my ears. God help those who wander into the great mire now, for even the firm uplands are becoming a morass. I found the black tor upon which I had seen the solitary watcher, and from its craggy summit I looked out myself across the melancholy downs. Rain squalls drifted across their russet face,
and the heavy slate-colored clouds hung low over the landscape, trailing in gray wreaths down the sides of the fantastic hills. In the distant hollow on the left, half hidden by the mist, the two thin towers of Baskerville Hall rose above the trees. They were the only signs of human life which I could see, save only those prehistoric huts which lay thickly upon the slopes of the hills. Nowhere was there any trace of that lonely man whom I had seen on the same spot 2 nights before. As I walked back, I was overtaken by Dr. Mortimer driving his dog-cart over a rough moorland track, which had led from the outlying farmhouse of Foulmire. He had been very attentive to us, and hardly a day passed when he was not called at the hall to see how we were getting on. He insisted upon my climbing into his dog-cart, and he gave me a lift homeward. I found him much troubled over the disappearance of his little spaniel. It had wandered on to the moor, and had never come back. I gave him such consolation as I might, but I thought of the pony on the Grimpen Mire, and I do not fancy that he will see his little dog again. "By the way, Mortimer," said I as we jolted through the rough road, "I suppose there are few people living within driving distance of this whom you do not know." "Hardly any, I think." "Can you, then, tell me the name of a woman whose initials are L? He thought for a few minutes. "No," said he. "There are a few gypsies and laboring folk whom I can't answer, but among the farmers and gentry there is no one whose initials are those. Wait a bit, though," he added after a pause. "There is Laura Lyons. Her initials are LL, but she lives in Coombe Tracy." "Who is she?" I asked. "She is Franklin's daughter." "What? Old Franklin the Crank?" "Exactly. She married an artist named Lyons, who came sketching on the moor. He proved to be a blackguard, and deserted her. The fault, from what I hear, may not have been entirely on one side. Her father refused to have anything to do with her because she had married without his consent, and perhaps for 1 or 2 other reasons as well. So, between the old sinner and the young one, the girl has had a pretty bad time." "How does she live?" "I fancy old Franklin allows her a pittance, but it cannot be more, for his own affairs are considerably involved. Whatever she may have deserved, one could not allow her to go hopelessly to the bad. Her story got about, and several of the people here did something to enable her to earn an honest living. Stapleton did for one, and Sir Charles for another. I gave a trifle myself. It was to set her up in a typewriting business." He wanted to know the object of my inquiries, but I managed to satisfy his curiosity without telling him too much, for there is no reason why we should have to take anyone into our confidence. "Tomorrow morning I shall find my way to Coombe Tracy, and if I can see this Miss Laura Lyons, of equivocal reputation, a long step will have been made towards clearing one incident in this chain of mysteries. I am certainly developing a wisdom of the serpent, for when Mortimer pressed his questions to an inconvenient extent, I asked him casually to what type Franklin's skull belonged, and so heard nothing but craniology for the rest of our drive. I have not lived for years with Sherlock Holmes for nothing. I have only one other incident to report upon this tempestuous and melancholy day. This was my conversation with Barrymore just now, which gives me one more strong card which I can play in due time. Mortimer had stayed to dinner, and he and the Baronet played écarté afterwards. The butler brought me my coffee into the library, and I took the chance to ask him a few questions. "Well," said I, "has this precious relation of yours departed, or is he still lurking out yonder?"
"I don't know, sir. I hope to heaven that he is gone, for he has brought nothing but trouble here. I've not heard of him since I let out food for him last, but that was 3 days ago."
"Did you see him then?"
"No, sir, but the food was gone when I went the next day."
"Then he was certainly there?"
"So you would think, sir, unless it was another man who took it."
I sat with my coffee cup halfway to my lips and stared at Barrymore. "You know that there is another man, then?"
"Yes, sir, there is another man upon the moor."
"Have you seen him?"
"No, sir."
"How do you know of him, then?"
"Selden told him of me, sir. A week ago or more. He was hiding, too, but he's not a convict as far as I can make out. I don't like it, Dr. Watson. I tell you straight, sir, that I don't like it."
He spoke with a sudden passion of earnestness. "Now listen to me, Barrymore. I have no interest in this matter but that of your master. I have come here with no object except to help him. Tell me, frankly, what is it that you don't like?" Barrymore hesitated for a moment, as if he regretted his outburst or found it difficult to express his own feelings in words.
"It's all these going on, sir,"
he cried at last, waving his hand towards the rain-lashed window which faced the moor.
"There's foul play somewhere, and there's black villainy brewing. To that I'll swear. Very glad I should be, sir, to see Sir Henry on his way back to London again."
"But what is it that alarms you?"
"Look at Sir Charles's death. That was bad enough. For all that the coroner said, look at those noises on the moor at night. There's not a man who would cross it after sundown if he was paid for it. Look at this stranger hiding out yonder, and watching and waiting. What's he waiting for? What does it mean? It means no good to anyone of the name of Baskerville. And very glad shall I be to be quit of it all on the day that Sir Henry's new servants are ready to take over the hall."
"But about this stranger," said I, "can you tell me anything about him? What did Selden say? Did he find out where he hid, or what he was doing?"
"He saw him once or twice, but he was a deep one and gives nothing away. At first he thought that he was the police, but soon he found that he had some lay of his own. A kind of gentleman he was, as far as he could see, but what he was doing he could not make out."
"And where did he say that he lived?"
"Among the old houses on the hillside, the stone huts where the old folk used to live."
"But how about his food?"
"Selden found out that he has got a lad who works for him, and brings all he needs. I dare say he goes to Coombe Tracy for what he wants."
"Very good, Barrymore. We may talk further on this some other time." When the butler had gone, I walked over to the black window, and I looked through the blurred pane at the driving clouds and at the tossing outline of the windswept trees. It is a wild night indoors, and what must be in a stone hut upon the moor. What passion of hatred can it be that leads a man to lurk in such a place at such a time? And what deep and earnest purpose can he have which calls for such a trial? There, in that hut upon the moor, seems to lie at the very centre of that problem which has vexed me so sorely. I swear that another day shall not have passed before I have done all that man can do to reach the heart of the mystery. Chapter 11. The Man on the Tor. The extract from my private diary which forms the last chapter has brought my narrative up to the 18th of October, a time when these strange events began to move swiftly towards their terrible conclusion. The incidents of the next few days are indelibly graven upon my recollection, and I can tell them without reference to the notes made at the time. I start them from the day which succeeded that upon which I established two facts of great importance. The one, that Miss Laura Lyons of Coombe Tracy had written to Sir Charles Baskerville and made an appointment with him at the very place and hour that he met his death. The other, that the lurking man upon the moor was to be found among the stone huts upon the hillside. With these two facts in my possession, I felt that either my intelligence or my courage must be deficient if I could not throw some further light upon these dark places. I had no opportunity to tell the baronet what I had learned about Miss Lyons upon the evening before, for Dr. Mortimer remained with him at cards until it was very late. At breakfast, however, I informed him about my discovery, and asked him whether he would care to accompany me to Coombe Tracy. At first he was very eager to come, but on second thoughts it seemed to both of us that if I went alone the results might be better. The more formal we made the visit, the less information we might obtain. I left Sir Henry behind, therefore, not without some prickings of conscience, and drove off upon my new quest. When I reached Coombe Tracy, I told Perkins to put up the horses, and I made inquiries for the lady whom I had come to interrogate. I had no difficulty in finding her rooms, which were central and well appointed. A maid showed me in without ceremony, and as I entered the sitting-room, a lady, who was sitting before a Remington typewriter, sprang up with a pleasant smile of welcome. Her face fell, however, when she saw that I was a stranger, and she sat down again and asked me the object of my visit. The first impression left by Miss Lyons was one of extreme beauty. Her eyes and hair were of the same rich hazel color, and her cheeks, though considerably freckled, were flushed with the exquisite bloom of the brunette and the dainty pink which lurks at the heart of the sulphur rose. Admiration was, I repeat, the first impression, but the second was criticism. There was something subtly wrong with her face, some coarseness of expression, some hardness, perhaps, of eye, some looseness of lip which marred its perfect beauty.
But these, of course, are afterthoughts. At the moment I was simply conscious that I was in the presence of a very handsome woman, and that she was asking me for the reasons of my visit. I had not quite understood until that instant how delicate my mission was. "I have the pleasure," said I, "of knowing your father." It was a clumsy introduction. The lady made me feel it.
"There is nothing in common between my father and me," she said. "I owe him nothing, and his friends are not mine. If it were not for the late Sir Charles Baskerville and some other kind hearts, I might have starved for all that my father cared."
"It was about the late Sir Charles Baskerville that I have come here to see you." The freckles started out on the lady's face.
"What can I tell you about him?" she asked.
Her fingers played nervously over the stops of her typewriter. "You knew him, did you not?"
"I have already said that I owe a great deal to his kindness. If I am unable to support myself, it is largely due to the interest which he took in my unhappy situation."
"Did you correspond with him?" The lady looked up with an angry gleam in her hazel eyes.
"What is the object of these questions?" she asked sharply.
"The object is to avoid a public scandal. It is better that I should ask them here than that the matter should pass outside our control." She was silent, and her face was very pale. At last she looked up with something reckless and defiant in her manner.
"Well, I'll answer," she said. "What are your questions?"
"Did you correspond with Sir Charles?"
"I certainly wrote him once or twice to acknowledge his delicacy and his generosity."
"Have you the dates of those letters?"
"No."
"Have you ever met him?"
"Yes, once or twice, when he came into Coombe Tracey. He was a very retiring man, and he preferred to do so by stealth."
"But if you saw him so seldom, and wrote so seldom, how did he know enough about your affairs to be able to help you, as you say that he has done?" She met my difficulty with utmost readiness.
"There were several gentlemen who knew my sad history, and united to help me. One was Mr. Stapleton, a neighbor and intimate friend of Sir Charles's. He was exceedingly kind, and it was through him that Sir Charles learned about my affairs."
I knew already that Sir Charles Baskerville had made Stapleton his almoner upon several occasions, so the lady's statement bore the impress of truth upon it. "Did you ever write to Sir Charles asking him to meet you?" I continued. Mrs. Lyons flushed with anger again.
"Really, sir, this is a very extraordinary question."
"I'm sorry, madam, but I must repeat it."
"Then I answer, certainly not."
"Not on the very day of Sir Charles's death?" The flush had faded in an instant, and a deathly face was before me. Her dry lips could not speak the "no," which I saw rather than heard. "Surely your memory deceives you," said I. "I could even quote the passage of your letter. It ran, 'Please, please, as you are a gentleman, burn this letter and be at the gate by 10 o'clock. I thought she had fainted, but she recovered herself by a supreme effort.
"Is there no such thing as a gentleman?" she gasped.
"You do Sir Charles an injustice. He did burn the letter. But sometimes a letter may be legible even when burned. You acknowledge now that you wrote it?"
"Yes, I did write it,"
she cried, pouring out her soul in a torrent of words.
"I did write it. Why should I deny it? I have no reason to be ashamed of it. I wished him to help me. I believed that if I had an interview I could gain his help, so I asked him to meet me."
"But why at such an hour?"
"Because I had only just learned that he was going to London next day, and might be away for months. There were reasons why I could not get there earlier."
"But why a rendezvous in the garden instead of a visit to the house?"
"Do you think a woman could go alone at that hour to a bachelor's house?"
"Well, what happened when you did get there?"
"I never went."
"Miss Lyons?"
"No, I swear to you on all I hold sacred. I never went. Something intervened to prevent my going."
"What was that?"
"This is a private matter. I cannot tell it."
"You acknowledge, then, that you made an appointment with Sir Charles at the very hour and place at which he met his death, but you deny that you kept the appointment?"
"That is the truth."
Again and again I cross-questioned her, but I could never get past that point. "Miss Lyons," said I, as I rose from the long and inconclusive interview, "you are taking a very great responsibility and putting yourself in a very false position by not making an absolutely clean breast of all that you know.
If I have to call in the aid of the police, you will find out how seriously you are compromised. If your position is innocent, why did you in the first instance deny having written to Sir Charles upon that date? Because I feared that some false conclusion might be drawn from it, and that I might find myself involved in a scandal. And why were you so pressing that Sir Charles should destroy your letter? If you have read the letter, you will know. I did not say I had read all the letter. You quoted some of it. I quoted the postscript. The letter had, as I said, been burned, and it was not all legible. I ask you once again why it was that you were so pressing that Sir Charles should destroy this letter which he received on the day of his death. The matter is a very private one. The more reason you should avoid a public investigation. I will tell you, then. If you have heard anything of my unhappy history, you will know I made a rash marriage, and had reason to regret it. I have heard so much. My life has been an incessant persecution from a husband whom I abhor. The law is upon his side, and every day I am faced by the possibility that he may force me to live with him. I had learned that there was the prospect of regaining my freedom if certain expenses could be met. It meant everything to me, peace of mind, happiness, self-respect, everything. I knew Sir Charles's generosity, and I thought that if he heard the story from my own lips, he would help me. Then how is it that you did not go? Because I received help in the interval from another source. Why, then, did you not write to Sir Charles and explain this? So I should have done had I not seen his death in the paper the next morning. The woman's story hung coherently together, and all my questions were unable to shake it. I could only check it by finding if she had, indeed, instituted divorce proceedings against her husband at or about the time of the tragedy. It was unlikely that she would dare to say she had not been to Baskerville Hall if she really had been, for a trap would be necessary to take her there, and could not have returned to Coombe Tracey until the early hours of the morning. Such an excursion could not be kept secret. The probability was, therefore, that she was telling the truth, or, at least, part of the truth. I came away baffled and disheartened. Once again, I reached the dead wall which seemed to be built across every path by which I tried to get at the object of my mission. And yet the more I thought about the lady's face and her manner, the more I felt as if something was being held back from me. Why should she turn so pale? Why should she fight against every admission until it was forced from her? Why should she have been so reticent at the time of the tragedy? Surely the explanation of all this could not be as innocent as she would have me believe. For the moment I could proceed no further in that direction, but must turn back to that other clue which was so sought for among the stone huts upon the moor. And that was the most vague direction. I realized it as I drove back and noted how hill after hill showed traces of ancient people. Barrymore's only indication had been that the stranger lived in one of these abandoned huts, and many hundreds of them are scattered throughout the length and breadth of the moor. But I had my own experience for a guide, since it had shown me the man himself standing upon the summit of the Black Tor. That, then, should be the center of my search. From there I should explore every hut upon the moor until I lighted upon the right one. If this man were inside it, I should find him from my own lips, at the point of my revolver if necessary, who he was and why he had dogged us so long. He might slip away from us in the crowd of Regent Street, but it would puzzle him to do so upon the lonely moor. On the other hand, if I should find the hut and its tenant should not be within it, I must remain there, however long the vigil, until he returned. Holmes had missed him in London. It would indeed be a triumph for me if I could run him to the earth where my master had failed. Luck had been against us again and again in this inquiry, but now at last it came to my aid, and the messenger of good fortune was none other than Mr. Frankland, who was standing, grey-whiskered and red-faced, outside the gate of his garden, which opened to the high road along which I travelled.
"Good day, Dr. Watson,"
cried he with unwonted good humour.
"You really must give your horse a rest, and come in to have a glass of wine to congratulate me."
My feelings toward him were very far from being friendly after what I had heard of his treatment of his daughter, but I was anxious to send Perkins and the wagonette home, and the opportunity was a good one. I alighted his message to Sir Henry that I should walk over in time for dinner. Then I followed Franklin into his dining-room.
"It is a great day for me, sir, one of the red-letter days of my life,"
he cried with many chuckles.
"I have brought off a double event. I mean to teach in these parts that law is law, and that there is a man here who does not fear to invoke it. I have established a right-of-way through the center of Old Middleton's Park, slap across it, sir, within 100 yards of his front door. What do you think of that? We'll teach these magnates that they cannot ride roughshod over the rights of the commoners. Confound them. And I've closed the wood where the Fenworthy folk used to picnic. These infernal people seem to think there are no rights of property, and that they can swarm where they like with their papers and their bottles. Both cases decided, Dr. Watson, and both are in my favor. I haven't had such a day since I had Sir John Morland for trespass because he shot in his own warren.
How on earth did you do that?
Look it up in the book, sir. It will repay reading. Franklin v. Morland, Court of Queen's Bench. Cost me £200, but I got my verdict.
Did it do you any good?
None, sir, none. I am proud to say I had no interest in the matter. I act entirely from a sense of public duty. I have no doubt, for example, that the Fernworthy people will burn me in effigy tonight. I told the police last time they did it that they should stop these disgraceful exhibitions. The county constabulary is in a scandalous state, sir, and it has not afforded me the protection to which I am entitled. The case of Franklin v. Regina will bring the matter before the attention to the public. I told them that they would have occasion to regret their treatment of me, and already my words have come true.
How so? I asked. The old man put on a very knowing expression.
Because I could tell them what they are dying to know, but no one would induce me to help the rascals in any way.
I had been casting round for some excuse by which I could get away from his gossip, but now I began to wish to hear more of it. I had seen enough of the contrary nature of the old sinner to understand that any strong sign of interest would be the surest way to stop his confidences. Some poaching case, no doubt? Said I in an indifferent manner.
Ha ha, my boy, a very much more important matter than that. What about the convict on the moor?
I stared. You don't mean that you know where he is, said I.
I may not know exactly where he is, but I am quite sure that I could help the police to lay their hands on him. Has it never struck you that the way to catch a man was to find out where he got his food and so trace it to him?
He seemed certain to be getting uncomfortably near the truth. No doubt, said I. But how do you know that he is anywhere upon the moor?
I know it because I have seen it with my own eyes, the messenger who takes him his food.
My heart sank for Barrymore. It was a serious thing to be in the power of this spiteful old busybody, but his next remark took a weight from my mind.
You'll be surprised to hear that his food is taken to him by a child. I see him every day through my telescope upon the roof. He passes along the same path at the same hour, and to whom should he be going except to the convict?
Here was luck indeed, and yet I suppressed all appearance of interest. A child! Barrymore had said that our unknown was supplied by a boy. It was on his track, and not upon the convicts, that Franklin had stumbled. If I could get his knowledge, it might save me a long and weary hunt, but incredulity and indifference were evidently my strongest cards. I should say that it was much more likely that it was the son of one of the moorland shepherds taking out his father's dinner. The least appearance of opposition struck fire out of the old autocrat. His eyes looked malignantly at me, and his grey whiskers bristled like those of an angry cat.
"Indeed, sir," said he,
pointing out over the wide-stretching moor.
"Do you see that black tor over yonder? Well, do you see the low hill beyond that thorn brush upon it? If it is the stoniest part of the whole moor, is that a place where a shepherd would likely take his station? Your suggestion, sir, is a most absurd one."
I meekly answered that I had spoken without knowing all the facts. My submission pleased him, and led him to further confidences.
"You may be sure, sir, that I have very good grounds before I come to an opinion. I have seen the boy again and again with his bundle. Every day, and sometimes twice a day, I have been able— But wait a moment, Dr. Watson. Do my eyes deceive me? Or is there at the present moment something moving upon the hillside?"
It was several miles off, but I could distinctly see a small dark dot against the dull green and grey.
"Come, sir, come!"
cried Franklin, rushing up the stairs.
You will see with your own eyes and judge for yourself.
The telescope, a formidable instrument mounted upon a tripod, stood upon the flat leads of the house. Franklin clapped his eye to it and gave a quick cry of satisfaction.
"Quick, Dr. Watson, quick, before he passes over the hill!"
There he was, sure enough, a small urchin with a little bundle upon his shoulder, toiling slowly upon the hill. When he reached the crest, I saw a ragged, uncouth figure outlined for an instant against the cold blue sky. He looked round him with a furtive and stealthy air, as one who dreads pursuit. Then he vanished over the hill.
"Well, am I right?"
"Certainly, there is a boy who seems to have some secret errand."
"And what that errand is, even a country constable could guess. But not one word shall they have from me. And I bind you to secrecy also. Dr. Watson, not a word, you understand."
"As you wish."
"They have treated me shamefully, shamefully. When the facts came out about Franklin versus Regina, I venture to think that a thrill of indignation will run through the country. Nothing would induce me to help the police in any way. For all they cared, it might have been me, instead of my effigy, which these rascals burned at the stake. Surely you are not going. You will help me to empty the decanter in honor of this great occasion."
But I resisted all his solicitations and succeeded in dissuading him from his announced intention of walking home with me. I kept the road as long as his eye was on me, and then I struck off across the moor and made for the stony hill over which the boy had disappeared. Everything was working in my favor, and I swore that it should not be through lack of energy or perseverance that I should miss the chance which fortune had thrown my way. The sun was already sinking when I reached the summit of the hill, and the long slopes beneath me were all golden green on one side and gray shadow on the other. A haze lay low upon the farthest skyline, out of which jutted the fantastic shapes of Believer and Vixen Tor. Over the wide expanse there was no sound and no movement. One great gray bird, a gull or curlew, soared aloft in the blue heaven. He and I seemed to be the only living things between the huge arch of the sky and the desert beneath it. The barren scene, the sense of loneliness, and the mystery and urgency of my task all struck a chill into my heart. The boy was nowhere to be seen, but down beneath me, in a cleft of hills, there was a circle of old stone huts, and in the middle of them was one which retained sufficient roof to act as a screen against the weather. My heart leaped within me as I saw it. This must be the burrow where the stranger lurked. At last my foot was on the threshold of its hiding place. His secret was within my grasp. As I approached the hut, walking as warily as Stapleton would do when with poised net he drew near the settled butterfly, I satisfied myself that the place had indeed been used as a habitation. A vague pathway among the boulders led to a dilapidated opening which served as a door. All was silent within. The unknown might be lurking there, or he might be prowling upon the moor. My nerves tingled with my sense of adventure. Throwing aside my cigarette, I closed my hand upon the butt of my revolver, and, walking swiftly up the door, I looked in. The place was empty, but there were ample signs that I had not come upon a false scent. This was certainly where the man lived. His blankets rolled in a waterproof lay upon that very stone slab which Neolithic man had once slumbered. The ashes of a fire were heaped in a rude grate. Beside it lay some cooking utensils and a bucket half full of water. A litter of empty tins showed that the place had been occupied for some time, and I saw, as my eyes became accustomed to the checkered light, the pannikin and a half-full bottle of spirits standing in the corner. In the middle of the hut a flat stone served its purpose as a table, and upon this stood a small cloth bundle, the same, no doubt, which I had seen through the telescope upon the shoulder of the boy. It contained a loaf of bread, a tinned tongue, and 2 tins of preserved peaches. As I set it down again, after having examined it, my heart leaped to see that it there lay upon the sheet of paper with writing upon it. I raised it, and this was what it read, roughly scrawled in pencil. Dr. Watson has gone to Coombe Tracy. For a moment I stood there with the paper in my hands, thinking out the meaning of this curt message. It was I, then, and not Sir Henry, who was being dogged by this secret man. He had not followed me himself, and he had set an agent, the boy perhaps, upon my track, and this was his report. Possibly I had taken no steps since I had been upon the moor, which had not been observed and reported. Always there was this feeling of unseen force, a fine net drawn around us with infinite skill and delicacy, holding us so lightly that it was only at some supreme moment that one realized that one was indeed entangled in its meshes. If there was one report, there might be others, so I looked around the hut in search of them. There was no trace, however, of anything of the kind, nor could I discover any sign which might indicate the character or intentions of the man who lived in this singular place, save that he must be Spartan habits and cared little for the comforts of life. When I thought of the heavy rains and looked at the gaping roof, I understood how strong and immutable must be the purpose which had kept him in that inhospitable abode. Was he our malignant enemy? Or was he, by chance, our guardian angel? I swore I would not leave the hut until I knew. Outside, the sun was sinking low, and the west was blazing with scarlet and gold. Its reflection was shot back in ruddy patches by the distant pools which lay amid the Grimpen mire. There were the 2 towers of Baskerville Hall, and there a distant blur of smoke which marked the villages of the Grimpen. Between the two, behind the hill, was the house of the Stapletons. All was sweet and mellow and peaceful in the golden evening light, and yet, as I looked at them, my soul shared none of that peace of nature, but quivered at the vagueness and the terror of that interview which every instant was bringing nearer. With tingling nerves but a fixed purpose, I sat on the dark recesses of the hut, and waited with somber patience for the coming of its tenant. And then at last I heard him. Far away came a sharp clink of the boot striking upon a stone, then another, and yet another, coming nearer and nearer. I shrank back into the darkest corner and cocked my pistol in my pocket, determined not to discover myself until I had an opportunity of seeing something of the stranger. There was a long pause, which showed that he had stopped. Then once more the footsteps approached, and a shadow fell across the opening of the hut.
"It is a lovely evening, my dear Watson," said a well-known voice. "I really think that you will be more comfortable outside than in."